Lawrence's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. The cursor blinked on the empty document, a stark reminder of his failure. 6 months. 6 goddamn months since his last story, and nothing but rejections and pitying looks from his agent. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, feeling the greasy strands between his fingers. When was the last time he'd showered? The days blurred together in a haze of writer's block and bottom shelf whiskey. His agent's words echoed in his mind. Get away, clear your head. Find your muse again, easy for her to say. She wasn't the one staring down eviction notices and dwindling bank accounts. That's how he found himself white-knuckling the steering wheel of his beat-up Corolla, driving up the winding mountain road to the Overlook Hotel. The brochure had promised solitude and inspiration. Jack just hoped it would deliver salvation. As he pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, the imposing structure loomed against the twilight sky. Jack squinted, his bloodshot eyes playing tricks on him. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw faces pressed against the darkened windows. Watching him, he blinked, and they were gone. The lobby assaulted his senses, the overpowering scent of lemon polish barely masking a musty underlayer, the oppressive silence broken only by the tick-tock of an ancient grandfather clock. Jack approached the reception desk, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the marble floor. A young woman with a nametag reading Wendy greeted him, her smile as plastic as her nametag. Welcome to the Overlook, Mr. Torrance. How long will you be staying with us? A week, maybe 2, Jack replied, his voice raspy from disuse. He cleared his throat. I'm a writer. Need some peace and quiet to work on my next book. The light tasted bitter on his tongue. Next book. As if the first one hadn't been a fluke, a one-hit wonder that left him grasping at literary straws. Wendy's smile flickered, a crack in her professional veneer, of course. Let me just check our availability. Her fingers clacked on the keyboard, the sound setting Jack's teeth on edge. It seems we only have one room available at the moment, room 237. A shadow passed over Wendy's face, there and gone so quickly Jack thought he might have imagined it. But a coil of unease tightened in his gut. Is there a problem with that room? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Oh, no, not at all, Wendy said, the words tumbling out too quickly. It's just, well, it's one of our older rooms. But it has a lovely view of the mountains. Jack's eyes narrowed. He had always had a knack for sniffing out a story, and every instinct told him there was more to room 237 than Wendy was letting on. But beggars can't be choosers, and right now, Jack was scraping the bottom of the barrel. Sounds perfect, he said, forcing a smile. As Wendy handed him the key, an actual metal key, not a modern key card, her hand trembled slightly. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Torrance, and if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk. Was that concern in her eyes, or pity? The elevator's asthmatic wheezing did nothing to calm Jack's frayed nerves as it lurched its way to the second floor. He dragged his battered suitcase down the long, carpeted hallway, the floral pattern faded and worn beneath his feet. Room 237 waited at the very end, isolated from the other guest rooms like a leper's exile. The lock turned with a heavy click that resonated in Jack's bones. He pushed open the door, wincing at the ominous creak of hinges. The room beyond was spacious, if oppressively musty. Heavy curtains framed a large window overlooking the craggy peaks and dense forests now cloaked in encroaching darkness. A king-size bed dominated one wall, while a sturdy wooden desk faced the window, the perfect spot for writing, or so Jack told himself. As he unpacked, a sense of wrongness settled over him like a shroud. The room was too quiet, the air too still. Jack shook his head, trying to dispel the creeping dread. It was just an old hotel room, nothing more. He was here to write, to rediscover his voice. To prove to himself and the world that he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. That first night passed in fitful bouts of sleep. Jack's dreams a kaleidoscope of unfinished manuscripts and sneering critics. He woke with gritty eyes and a pounding headache, but forced himself to the desk. The words came slowly at first, then faster, a trickle becoming a torrent. As darkness fell once more, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. It was just after midnight when he first heard it. A whisper so faint he thought he might have imagined it. Jack sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to listen. There it was again, a susurration just on the edge of hearing, like someone breathing words into his ear. Hello, he called out, hating the tremor in his voice. Silence answered him, heavy and expectant. Jack stumbled out of bed, checking the hallway with shaking hands. Empty, he inspected every corner of the room, finding nothing out of place. Shaking his head, he climbed back into bed. Just the wind, he muttered. or pipe settling, get it together at Torrance. But sleep eluded him, and when he finally drifted off, his dreams were a nightmare parade of shadowy figures and half-heard voices, all demanding something just beyond his comprehension. The next day, fatigue dogged his steps, the words that had flowed so freely now stuttered and died on the page. Jack's mind felt foggy, disjointed, as night fell once more, dread pulled in his stomach like lead. He considered asking for a different room, but pride stopped him. He was here to write a horror novel, for Christ's sake. A few strange noises shouldn't rattle him. That night, the whispers came again, louder and more insistent. Jack couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, pleading. He buried his head under the pillow, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. If anything, it seemed to bring the voices closer, as if they were inside his own skull. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. Jack's breath frosted in the air, tiny ice crystals forming with each panicked exhalation. The whispers crescendoed to a fever pitch, a cacophony of desperate voices clamoring for attention. And then, silence, absolute and oppressive. Jack lay there, heart thundering against his ribcage, until dawn's weak light filtered through the curtains. As he stumbled to the bathroom, his reflection stopped him cold. Dark circles ringed his bloodshot eyes, and was it his imagination, or had new lines etched themselves into his face overnight? He splashed water on his face, the icy shock bringing momentary clarity. This couldn't go on. He needed answers, needed to know the truth about room 237, whatever the cost to his pride or sanity. At the front desk, Wendy's cheerful facade crumbled under Jack's determined questioning. "I shouldn't say anything," she stammered, eyes darting nervously to a door marked management. "They don't like us to talk about it." "Please," Jack pressed, desperation lending steel to his voice. "I need to know." Wendy glanced around, then leaned in close. The scent of her shampoo, something floral and sweet, was a jarring note of normalcy in Jack's increasingly fractured world. "Room 237 has a history," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "Suicides, disappearances, people check in, but they don't always check out, if you know what I mean. We've had guests complain about strange noises, cold spots, even apparitions. The room's been renovated, blessed, exorcised, nothing helps." Jack's mind reeled, pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking into place. "Why don't you close it off?" Wendy shrugged helplessly. "Money, the hotel's struggling, we need every room, even the problematic ones." Armed with this knowledge, Jack returned to the room that now felt more like a prison cell. Part of him, the rational part that still clung to sanity, screamed to flee, to put the overlook in his rearview mirror and never look back. But a larger part, the writer in him, or was it something darker, something that had awakened in this godforsaken place, was intrigued. This was the story he had come here to find, served up on a silver platter of supernatural horror. He spent the day researching the hotel's history, uncovering a litany of tragedies tied to room 237, a jealous husband who murdered his wife and then himself in 1912, their screams echoing through the halls. A depressed heiress who overdosed in 1948, her body discovered days later by a horrified maid. A honeymooning couple who vanished without a trace in 1975, leaving behind only rumpled sheets and onion room service. As night fell once more, Jack steeled himself for what was to come. He set up cameras, audio recorders, anything that might capture evidence of the paranormal. His hands shook as he downed a minibar bottle of whiskey, liquid courage burning a path to his roiling stomach. Then he waited. The whispers began earlier this time, swirling around him like smoke. Jack forced himself to remain calm, to listen. Slowly, maddeningly, he began to distinguish words. "Help us, trapped, escape." The temperature dropped, Jack's breath misting in the air. Frost patterns etched themselves across the window, forming and dissolving in hypnotic patterns. And then, in the mirror above the desk, he saw them, faces, dozens of them, superimposed on his reflection. Men, women, young, old, all wearing expressions of terror and anguish that would haunt Jack's dreams for years to come. Their mouths moved in sync with the whispers, pleading for release. Jack stumbled back, knocking over his chair with a crash that seemed to come from a million miles away. The faces began to push through the mirror, the glass rippling like water. Hands reached for him, insubstantial yet terrifyingly real. In that moment, Jack understood. Room 237 wasn't just haunted, it was a trap. A supernatural snare that had claimed countless victims over the decades. And now, it wanted him, wanted his fear, his sanity, his very soul. The realization broke whatever spell had been clouding his mind. Jack snatched up his laptop, the only thing that mattered now, and ran. He didn't stop until he reached his car, lungs burning and legs trembling. As he peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing in protest, Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw faces pressed against the window of room 237, watching him drive away with a mixture of envy and relief. Then the overlook disappeared around a bend, taking its secrets with it. 3 months later, Jack's novel The Whispers in Room 237 topped the bestseller lists. Critics praised its chilling authenticity, the way it blurred the line between fiction and reality. Readers devoured the tale of a writer's descent into madness, debating endlessly whether the horrors were supernatural or psychological. If only they knew, Jack should have felt elated, vindicated. This was everything he dreamed of: fame, fortune, literary acclaim. But as he sat in his plush New York apartment, staring at the blank document on his computer screen, a familiar dread settled over him. The cursor blinked, an accusatory metronome. And somewhere, just on the edge of hearing, a whisper began. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said he dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. David, man, we need to talk. That was when he told me about the no-end house. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone. That it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheep ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows, plural, with the exception of the chairs. There were others. I had barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe, but I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid. so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it, my shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight, wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second and I saw it. Nothing, I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there. However high it was, I couldn't see any walls, either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, the standard darkwood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return and there was no way I would make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6 and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream, I didn't make a sound. At first I scratched softly, the wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees, the only sound in the room the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there, the door was there, I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall. Are you alright? I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me and I saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft, white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak, I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room, but that was before room 6. I just stood there staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit, I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. David, you should have listened. When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me. But for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all 4, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it, maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered, just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to dwell. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6, I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was. I was outside, not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it, a door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble, but still the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged toward the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8, I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of No End House. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me, it was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please, please, don't do it. Please, don't hurt me. What? I asked. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, alright, let's try and figure this. And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me, you're going to hurt me, don't please, you're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9, this number was on a person, a living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me, David. I had to ask, yes, you're going to hurt me, you're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David, he was me, right down to the voice, but that 9. I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth, I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair and immediately the other David went quiet. David, he said in my voice, what do you think you're going to do? I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. I'm going to get out of here. David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me. It was uncanny, his height and even the way he stood matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. Now, his voice was slightly deeper than my own. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you and I'm going to keep you here. I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point. Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark, then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, and suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room. And that's exactly what it was, the end. No end house had an end and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened, a light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me and I was standing. After a moment or two of and senses, I slowly walked toward that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it, still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again handwritten. David Williams, congratulations, you have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house and laughed as I saw the small tent etched into the wood. Like any other young person my age, I was very adventurous and loved exploring unknown places, always looking for thrills and challenges. My parents were always very strict with me, forbidding me to go to places they considered inappropriate like parties and going out with friends. I felt trapped, like I was being deprived of experiencing the outside world like other young people, which only fueled even more the desire to venture outside the limits imposed on me. Like any other young person my age, I became rebellious. I lied to my parents that I was going somewhere, but I was breaking into an abandoned house or exploring some tunnel or underground cave with my friends who shared the same interests. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to go further, see new things and feel more of that butterflies in my stomach that only adventure can provide. That's why when my friend Zach called me and said he discovered a location on an unsealed sewer entrance to the catacombs of Paris, I was all for it. If you've never heard of this place or have only a brief acquaintance, the Paris catacombs are a gigantic underground network of tunnels and galleries that extend for about 300 kilometers under the city of Paris, France. The catacombs, originally built as quarries around the 18th century, were turned into public ossuaries in the late 18th century and are currently visited by tourists as a historical and cultural attraction. The catacombs contain the remains of millions of Parisians who were moved there after the city's cemeteries closed. Due to their age and fragility, the catacombs have strict access rules to protect cultural heritage and the safety of visitors. In addition, the catacombs are a real underground labyrinth. It's not difficult to get lost in there. For these reasons, visits are highly regulated and controlled. Entering the Paris catacombs beyond the permitted areas for visitation was strictly prohibited. Violating this rule could result in fines and other legal penalties. I should have stopped there, but at that time all my rebellious mind had in my head was, everything forbiddens tasted better. We called another friend Sebastian and started planning everything. When are we going? What would we take? And how would we not get lost? The last one was solved by Zach. We would use luminescent paints. And yes, when I look back I realize how stupid this all was from the start. I don't remember what lie I told my parents, but they believed it. And I was able to meet my two friends without any problem. Entering the catacombs of Paris through a secret entrance in the sewers was always going to be the adventure of a lifetime. I was very excited and looking forward to this adventure so different from the ones I've done before. Zach led the way. He took us down to the sewer where the entrance to the ossuary is said to be. It took us about 20 minutes to find that entrance because Zach actually didn't know of a location at all. He just heard a rumor that there was an entrance here. The entrance was narrow and dark, with only a shaft of light coming in through the crack at the top. Zach was the first to enter, followed by me and Sebastian. We managed to smell the strong and unpleasant smell of sewage in our nostrils, but that didn't stop us from moving forward. It was then that we saw a steep staircase leading even deeper. We walked down the stairs cautiously, carefully watching each step we took. The sound of water running through the pipes echoed throughout the place. But that didn't bother me. After all, I was focused on finding something new. We arrived in a huge underground room with dirty, damp walls and a slippery floor. The flashlights we carried illuminated only a small part of the room, and the surrounding darkness made it even more frightening. At first I wasn't sure if we were entering the ossuary or if it was just one of the sewer corridors. But then our flashlight beams began to reveal a few bones here and there until an entire walls adorned with bones and human skulls gave us a macabre welcome. As we made our way deeper into the catacombs, the air grew stale and musty. The damp walls seemed to close in around us, and the darkness was all-consuming. But instead of feeling afraid, we feel like those brave YouTubers with channels aimed at urban explorers who enter forbidden places like this. And that was amazing. The Paris catacomb was an incredible gallery of macabre art. It was impossible to deny the morbid beauty of that place. The walls were lined with stacked skulls and human bones, forming grotesque and frightening images. I couldn't help feeling that I was being watched through the hollow eyes of hundreds of skulls. I grabbed my cell phone and started filming around, capturing every detail of the historic structures, until an eerie sound echoed through the dark tunnels. Everything was silent until Zach said, "Relax, you pussies." It must have been just a car passing overhead. He emphasized his statement by pointing to the ceiling above us. We relaxed after that. Zach's words made sense. We were somewhere under the city. There couldn't be anything here. The sound could only have come from the surface. As time went on, my earlier enthusiasm was turning into another feeling, which I refused to show to my friends, as I didn't want to tarnish my facade of a great and courageous adventurer. But I couldn't deny that little voice telling me something was wrong was getting louder. Filming Sebastian walking side by side to a wall full of piled up human bones as he said, "Look at this. This is so cool," helped me to recover a little. Until then I noticed Zach enter a different corridor and move further and further away. "Zach, don't go wandering around aimlessly. You know it's easy to get lost around here." I shouted, but Zach just responded with his typical arrogance. "Easy, Mom, I just want to take a look around these halls. Before you know I'll be back." I rolled my eyes and continued filming Sebastian. I was used to Zach's habit of drifting away from the group and somehow never getting lost. It was from that point on that our adventure turned into a nightmare. Suddenly Zach screamed from one of the hallways, causing me and Sebastian to turn around in alarm. I shouted his name and shined the flashlight on all the corridor's entrances nearby, but I couldn't find him. Then sounds like bones creaking and clinking echoed through the galleries, making my blood run cold. "Zach, this isn't funny, you bastard." I yelled loud as I shined every entrances I could see, believing Zach was purposely trying to scare us. And then I realized that Sebastian was frozen, looking with eyes filled with utter terror in my direction, more specifically behind me. And then I heard a low, inhuman snarl. Slow and terrified I turned around. The flashlight shook in my hands, but I kept the grip as tight as I could to illuminate whatever was behind me. I had explored many unknown places in my life. I saw so many things, so many stories to tell, but I had never seen anything like it before. Before me was a creature that could only be described as something resembling a giant centipede, made up mostly of several bones of various widths and thicknesses, and what appeared to be exposed tendons and muscles. In place of its head was a massive human skull with large, sharp teeth stained red, whose origin I refused to believe. That gigantic thing moved slowly with its many twisted legs towards us, staring at us with large empty eye sockets as it rose with the front part of its long body until it surpassed our height and almost touched the ceiling. For a moment we simply stared, unable to believe what we were seeing, until the grotesque creature released a high-pitched, screeching sound that made us shiver to the bone. We ran without looking back, trying to keep a strong and steady pace, following the luminous paint that Zach used to mark the way to the exit. But it was when we heard the creature's heavy footsteps and its jaws grinding that the adrenaline took over our body. I dropped the backpack to get rid of the weight, and Sebastian did the same. At some point in the panic I lost my flashlight and cell phone too, but at that moment material things didn't matter. Miraculously I managed to make my escape to the exit, but when I looked back to see if that monster was still following me, I realized with horror that Sebastian was no longer behind me. I headed back to the entryway again, even though all my instincts told me not to. I screamed Sebastian's name as loud as my lungs would allow, but the darkness only answered me with silence. That experience changed me forever. I will never be the same fearless adventurer I was before. I managed to escape with my life, but the price I paid for my recklessness was high. I lost my best friends, and now I live with this bitter and deserved guilt for the rest of my life. I never thought I'd dread waking up, but here I am, eyes squeezed shut, praying that when I open them, I'll see anything different. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and I'm trapped in a nightmare I can't escape. It started like any other day. I remember it perfectly, every goddamn detail. The smell of coffee brewing downstairs, the sound of Alicia humming in the kitchen, the warmth of sunlight streaming through our bedroom window. I sat up, stretching, and glanced at the clock, 7:15 a.m. right on schedule. I padded downstairs, following the scent of breakfast. Alicia stood at the stove, her back to me, swaying slightly as she flipped pancakes. Her dark curls were piled high on her head, and she wore my old college t-shirt, the one with the hole in the sleeve that she refused to throw away. "Morning, beautiful," I said, wrapping my arms around her waist and planting a kiss on her neck. She laughed, leaning back into me. "Morning, sleepyhead." I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm again. "Not a chance," I replied, reaching around her to snag a piece of bacon from the plate on the counter. "Can't be late today, big presentation, remember?" Alicia swatted my hand playfully. "How could I forget? You've only been stressing about it for weeks." We ate breakfast together, chatting about our plans for the day. Alicia had a busy schedule at the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade. I had my presentation to the board, which could lead to a big promotion if it went well. As I finished my coffee, Alicia glanced at her watch. "Oh, I better get going. Parent-teacher conference is this afternoon, so I need to get there early to set up." She stood, grabbing her bag and car keys. I rose to walk her to the door, as I always did. "Knock him dead today, babe," she said, stretching up on her toes to kiss me goodbye. "You're gonna do great, thanks," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Have a good day." Love you too," she called over her shoulder as she headed for her car. I watched her pull out of the driveway, waving as she drove away. Then I went back inside to finish getting ready for work. The day passed in a blur of meetings and last-minute preparations. By the time my presentation rolled around at 3 p.m., I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. But it went well better than I'd hoped, actually. The board seemed impressed, and my boss even hinted at that promotion as we wrapped up. I was on cloud 9 as I packed up my things, ready to head home and celebrate with Alicia. I pulled out my phone to call her, wanting to share the good news right away. That's when everything changed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice I didn't recognize answered. "Hello, is this Marcus Thompson?" My stomach dropped. Something in the woman's tone sent ice through my veins. "Yes, this is Marcus," I replied, my voice suddenly hoarse. "Who is this?" "Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Reeves from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Alicia. There's been an accident." The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles turning white. "What happened? Is she okay?" The pause before the nurse's response lasted an eternity. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was a multi-car pileup on the highway. The doctors did everything they could, but I'm afraid Alicia didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. I'd just seen Alicia this morning. We'd made plans for dinner. She was fine. She had to be fine. The next few hours passed in a haze. Somehow, I made it to the hospital. I remember the harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the pitying looks from the staff. And then, seeing her, lying there so still, so unlike the vibrant woman I'd kissed goodbye that morning. I don't know how long I sat there, holding her hand, willing her to wake up. To smile at me one more time, to tell me this was all a cruel joke. But she didn't, and eventually, a gentle-voiced doctor came to take me away, to discuss arrangements I couldn't begin to comprehend. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember climbing the stairs to our bed, where Alicia would never sleep again. I just remember collapsing onto the mattress, still in my suit, and praying that when I woke up, this would all be a terrible dream. Sleep came, eventually, a blessed escape from the crushing weight of grief. And then, I opened my eyes. The smell of coffee drifted up from downstairs. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window. For one blissful moment, I thought my prayer had been answered. Then I heard it, Alicia humming in the kitchen. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. The clock on the nightstand read 7:15 a.m. Impossible. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling in my haste to get downstairs. And there she was, Alicia, alive and well, standing at the stove in my old college t-shirt, flipping pancakes. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, glancing over her shoulder with a smile. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep through your alarm again." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible, Marcus. Alicia's smile faded, replaced by concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I crossed the kitchen into strides, pulling her into my arms so tightly she let out a surprised oof. "Well, what's gotten into you?" She laughed, returning the hug. "Bad dream. I managed managed to choke out, burying my face in her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. A really, really bad dream, Alicia pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. Well, you're awake now, and everything's fine, okay? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because suddenly I remembered I'd lived this moment before. Yesterday morning, the morning Alicia died. As we ate breakfast, my mind raced. Had it all been a dream? Some kind of stress-induced hallucination. It had felt so real, so visceral. But here was Alicia, alive and well, talking about her parent-teacher conferences as if nothing had happened. I tried to shake off the lingering dread as Alicia gathered her things to leave. But as she reached for her car keys, panic seized me. Wait, I blurted out, grabbing her wrist. Don't drive today, please. Alicia frowned, confused. What? Why not? I scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't make me sound insane. I have a bad feeling. Can you carpool with someone? Or I could drive you, Marcus. I can't just change my plans at the last minute. I need my car for errands after work, remember? She studied my face, were increasing her brow. Are you sure you're okay? That must have been some nightmare. I forced a smile, trying to appear calm. Yeah, sorry, I'm fine. Just be careful, okay? I love you too, she replied, still looking concerned. Try not to stress too much about your presentation. You're going to do great. And then she was gone, just like before. I watched her pull out of the driveway, my heart in my throat. I spent the morning in a state of high anxiety, jumping every time my phone rang. But as the hours ticked by with no bad news, I started to relax. Maybe it really had just been a nightmare. My presentation went well, just as it had in my dream. Memory, I wasn't sure what to call it anymore. As I packed up my things afterward, I decided to call Alicia just to put my mind at ease. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello, is this Marcus Thompson? Ice flooded my veins, the same voice, the same words. Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Reeves from Mercy General Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Alicia. There's been an accident. No. This couldn't be happening, not again. What happened? I demanded, even though I already knew the answer. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. Your wife was brought in about an hour ago. There was an incident at the school where she works. A student's parent became violent, and I'm afraid Alicia didn't make it. I'm so sorry for your loss. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I raced to the hospital, as I saw Alicia's still form once again, as I held her lifeless hand, I knew it was all too real. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that when I woke up tomorrow, it would all begin again. I don't know how many times I've lived this day now, 10, 50, 100. They've all blurred together in a nightmarish haze of grief and desperation. Each morning, I wake up at 7:15 a.m. Each morning, I rush downstairs to find Alicia alive, humming in the kitchen. And each evening, no matter what I do, I receive that dreaded phone call. I've tried everything I can think of. I've begged Alicia to stay home, faking illnesses and family emergencies. I've disconnected her car battery, slashed her tires, hidden her keys. I've called the school with bomb threats, tried to get it shut down for the day. Nothing works. If Alicia stays home, she dies in a house fire. If she can't drive, she takes the bus which crashes. If the school closes, she goes to run errands instead and gets caught in a store robbery gone wrong. It's like the universe itself is conspiring to take her from me, over and over again. Today, I decide to try a different approach. Instead of trying to keep Alicia home or safe, I'll stay with her. All day, maybe if I'm there, I can protect her. When she leaves for work, I follow in my car. She notices, of course, pulling over after a few blocks. Marcus, what are you doing? She asks as I approach her window, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. I need to be with you today, I say, knowing how crazy I must sound. Please, Alicia, trust me. It's important. She studies my face for a long moment, then sighs. Okay, get in. But you're explaining on the way as we drive. I try to tell her the truth. About the time loop, about her dying every day, about my desperate attempts to save her. Alicia listens silently, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, she speaks. Marcus, I think you need help. This isn't normal. Maybe we should go to the hospital instead of work. No. I shout, making her jump. No hospitals, please, Alicia. Just let me stay with you today. If nothing happens, I promise I'll get help tomorrow. She agrees, reluctantly. We spend the day together at her school. I help her anxiously, scanning for threats, jumping at every sudden noise. Alicia's colleagues give us odd looks, but she makes excuses about a family situation. As the final bell rings, I begin to hope. Maybe this time it worked. Maybe I've finally broken the cycle. We're walking to her car when I hear the screech of tires. I turn to see a car careening towards us, the driver slumped over the wheel. Time slows. I reach for Alicia, trying to push her out of the way. But I'm too slow, always too slow. The impact throws us both. I hit the ground hard, my vision blurring. When it clears, I see Alicia lying motionless a few feet away, a growing pool of blood beneath her. No, I whispered, crawling towards her. No, 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 not again. Please, not again, but it's too late. By the time the ambulance arrives, Alicia is gone. And I'm left once more with the certainty that tomorrow it will all begin again. The next morning, I don't get out of bed. What's the point? Nothing I do makes a difference. Alicia always dies, and I'm always left alone with my grief. I hear her calling from downstairs, concern in her voice. But I can't face her, can't watch her die again. Eventually, she comes up to check on me. Marcus, are you okay? I roll over, burying my face in the pillow. Go away, Alicia, please. The bed dips as she sits beside me, her hand gentle on my back. What's wrong? Talk to me. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, I mutter. Try me, she says softly, so I do. I tell her everything, my voice muffled by the pillow. About the time loop, about watching her die over and over, about my failed attempts to save her. When I finish, silence stretches between us. Then Alicia speaks, her voice trembling slightly. I don't understand what's happening, Marcus. But I believe that you believe it, and I'm here. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. I roll over, meeting her eyes. The love and concern I see there breaks something inside me. I pull her into my arms, holding her tight as sobs rack my body. We spend the day at home, talking, crying, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. As evening approaches, I grow increasingly anxious. Maybe it'll be different this time, Alicia says, squeezing my hand. Maybe staying home was the answer. I want to believe her. But as the clock ticks towards the dreaded hour, a sense of inevitability settles over me. At 4:17 p.m., exactly when the call usually comes, there's a knock at the door instead. Alicia moves to answer it, but I hold her back. No, let me. I open the door to find two solemn-faced police officers. Mr. Thompson, one asks, I'm afraid we have some bad news. There's been an accident. I don't hear the rest. Because behind them, on the street, I see a familiar figure, a man in a dark suit watching us. As our eyes meet, he smiles a cold, cruel expression that chills me to my core. Then he turns and walks away, vanishing into thin air. I slam the door shut, my mind reeling. Who was that? What did it mean? But there's no time to ponder it. Because Alicia is on the floor, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Heart attack, that's what the paramedics say when they arrive. Nothing anyone could have done. As I watch them take Alicia's body away, that strange man's smile haunts me. For the first time, I wonder if there's more to this nightmare than I realized. The next morning, I wake with a new determination. If I can't save Alicia and God, it kills me to even think that maybe I can at least find out why this is happening. I go through the motions of the morning, hugging Alicia extra tight before she leaves. Then I set out to find the man in the suit. I drive around town, watching for him. Hours pass with no sign. As 4:17 approaches, I find myself near the park where Alicia and I had our first date. And there he is, sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. I approach cautiously, my heart pounding. Who are you? I demand. Why are you doing this to me? He looks up, that same cold smile on his face. Oh, Marcus. I was wondering when you'd find me. You know my name. He chuckles. I know everything about you, Marcus. And about Alicia, a chill runs down my spine. Are you God, the devil? The man's laughter rings out, harsh and mocking. Nothing so grand, I'm afraid. Think of me as an interested observer. Observer of what? I ask, my fists clenching at my sides. He stands, brushing breadcrumbs from his suit. Of you, Marcus, of your pain, your grief, your desperation. It's all quite fascinating, really. Rage boils up inside me. I lunge at him, intent on wiping that smug smile off his face. But my hands pass right through him, as if he's made of smoke. Now, he tuts, none of that, we're just getting to know each other. Why? I scream, drawing startled looks from passers-by. Why are you doing this? The man's smile fades, replaced by a look of cold curiosity. Because I can, because your suffering amuses me. Because I want to see how long it takes to break you completely. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stagger back, shaking my head in denial. No, this can't be real. You can't be real. Oh, I'm very real, Marcus, he says, stepping closer. And this is very, very real for you, at least. My phone rings. For 17 p.m., I already know what I'll hear when I answer. The man in the suit watches me, his head tilted in interest. Well, aren't you going to get that? I'm sure it's important news about dear Alicia. I want to run. To scream, to wake up from this nightmare, but I'm rooted to the spot, trapped in this moment of horror. As I raise the phone to my ear, the man in the suit begins to fade away. But his parting words echo in my mind long after he's gone. Sweet dreams, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow and the next day. And the next, the revelation of the man in the suit haunts me. Each day, as I wake to the same morning routine, I'm torn between my desperate need to save Alicia and my burning desire to understand to defeat this cruel entity that's toying with our lives. Today, I decide to ignore him completely. I focus all my energy on Alicia, determined to find some way, any way, to break the cycle. Let's run away, I blurt out over breakfast. Alicia pauses, fork halfway to her mouth. What? Let's just go, right now. Get in the car and drive until we can't drive anymore. She studies my face, concern etching lines around her eyes. Marcus, what's going on? You've been acting strange for days now. I take her hand, willing her to understand. Please, Alicia, trust me. We need to leave, now. Maybe it's the desperation in my voice, or maybe it's the love that's carried us through 7 years of marriage. Whatever the reason, Alicia nods. Okay, let's go. We throw some clothes in a bag and hit the road. As we drive out of town, I keep glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in the suit following us. But the highway behind us remains clear for the first time in what feels like an eternity. I begin to hope. We drive for hours, putting miles between us and the town where Alicia has died 100 deaths. We laugh, we sing along to the radio, we reminisce about old road trips. As the sun begins to set, we pull into a small coastal town. Let's stay here tonight, Alicia suggests, pointing to a quaint bed and breakfast. I check my watch. 6:43 p.m. We've made it past for 17. Past the time Alicia always dies. We did it, I whisper, tears pricking my eyes. We really did it, Alicia squeezes my hand. Did what, babe? Before I can answer, a commotion down the street catches our attention. A crowd is gathering, pointing at something in the sky. Is that a plane? Someone shouts. It's flying awfully low. My blood runs cold. No, it can't be. The roar of engines fills the air. I grab Alicia, trying to pull her to safety, but it's too late. The plane crashes into the bed and breakfast in a deafening explosion of fire and debris. In the chaos that follows the screaming, the sirens, the frantic attempts at rescue, I search desperately for Alicia. But deep down, I already know. As I stand there, watching firefighters battle the blaze, I feel a presence beside me. Did you really think it would be that easy? The man in the suit asks, his tone conversational, that you could outrun fate. I don't look at him, can't look at him. Why'd I choke out? Why her? Why us? He shrugs, the movement visible from the corner of my eye. Why not? Your pain is exquisite. Your love, your desperation, your growing madness, it's also deliciously human. I'll stop you, I growl. Somehow, I'll find a way. His laughter is like broken glass. Oh, Marcus, I do hope you try. It'll make this game so much more interesting. I wake the next morning with a new plan forming. If I can't save Alicia by changing her fate, maybe I can save her by changing mine. I go through the motions of our morning routine one last time, savoring every moment with her as she leaves for work. I kiss her deeply. I love you. I say always remember that. She smiles, a little puzzled. I love you too. Are you sure you're okay? I nod, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Have a great day, babe. As soon as she's gone, I start gathering supplies, rope, a chair, a notepad. I write Alicia a letter, pouring out everything: the time loop, the deaths, the man in the suit. I tell her how much I love her, how sorry I am that I couldn't save her. I beg her to live a full, happy life, then I prepare the news. Just before 17, I position myself on the chair. My plan is simple. If I die first, maybe the loop will break, maybe Alicia will live. As I stand there, heart pounding, the man in the suit appears. My, he says, looking around at my preparations. This is certainly a new approach. Go to hell. I spit. He smiles, cold and cruel. You first. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, and step off the chair. The rope pulls tight, and I wake up gasping, back in bed. 7:15 a.m. Another failed attempt. But something's different this time. There's no smell of coffee no sound of Alicia humming downstairs. I rush to the kitchen, my heart in my throat. It's empty, cold. Alicia, I call out, panic rising. Alicia, where are you? She's not here, Marcus, a familiar voice says behind me. I whirl to find the man in the suit lounging in our armchair, looking utterly at ease. What did you do? I demand. Where is she? He examines his nails, the picture of casual indifference. I didn't do anything. You did. What are you talking about? He sighs, as if explaining to a particularly slow child. You changed the rules, Marcus. You died first. So now, she never existed. The world spins around me. I grab the counter to keep from falling. No, I whisper. No, bring her back, please. I can't bring back someone who was never born, he says, standing, but don't worry. I'm sure we can find new ways to continue our little game as the truth of what I've done sinks in. I slide to the floor, a scream of anguish tearing from my throat. The man in the suit watches, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Well, he says, straightening his jacket, shall we begin again? The world fades to black, and I brace myself for whatever fresh hell awaits. Because now I know the truth, there's no escape, no way to win. Just an eternity of loss, pain, and the cruel smile of the man in the suit. But as consciousness returns, something feels off. The bed beneath me is harder than usual, the air smells different, antiseptic, sterile. I open my eyes to find myself in a hospital room, machines beep steadily around me. And there, holding my hand, her eyes reddened from crying, is Alicia. Oh my God, she breathes. Marcus, can you hear me? I try to speak, but my throat is dry, raw. Alicia quickly holds a cup of water to my lips. What happened? I managed to croak out. Alicia's eyes fill with fresh tears. You've been in a coma, baby, for 3 months. There was an accident on your way to work. The doctors weren't sure you'd ever wake up. My mind reels. A coma, was it all a dream? The time loop, the deaths, the man in the suit. As if summoned by my thoughts, I see a flicker of movement by the door. The man in the suit stands there, watching. But this time his smile doesn't seem cruel. It's almost approving. He nods once, then vanishes. Marcus, Alicia's voice pulls me back. Are you okay? Should I call the doctor? I look at her, really look at her, my beautiful, vibrant, alive wife. Whatever happened, whatever was real or not real, none of it matters now. I'm okay, I say, squeezing her hand. Everything's okay now. As Alicia calls for the doctor, I close my eyes, savoring the feeling of her hand in mine. I don't know if I've won, lost, or simply been released from some cosmic game. But I do know one thing, I'll never take a single moment with Alicia for granted again.